A lot of those disputes, a lot of that anger, a lot of that frustration can be dealt with by just having a simple power of attorney in place. Just taking the time to go through the process of putting the power of attorney in place, choosing people wisely to act on your behalf when you cannot. Welcome to the Wealth Conversation podcast. In this episode, I will be talking about a topic that I feel is extremely important, and it comes up a lot when I'm dealing with clients and just talking with family members and friends in general. And that's about expecting the unexpected. And a lot of times we're planning for the future and thinking about all the positive things that we want to do, all the amazing holidays we want to go on, what we want to buy for ourselves and our children and family members. And all of that requires some sort of money. But we never, or we hardly take the time to talk about and think about what if the unexpected happens? And the most common scenario people talk about is, when the washing machine breaks down, will you have enough in your savings to cover, the cost of replacing the washing machine or getting it repaired? Or if your car breaks down, will you be able to cover the costs of fixing the car or replacing tires, etc.? And those are all, practical things that I think everyone should be thinking about. But what about if you are unable to make decisions for yourself for a period of time? What if your health deteriorates in such a way that you will, from a particular point, you will no longer be able to make decisions for yourself? So in these scenarios, you're still alive, you're still living, you're still incurring living costs, but you can't talk to your bank. You can no longer effectively speak to maybe your investment manager or legal representatives. So you need someone to act on your behalf. Now, the other unexpected scenario, which we all expect, but very few of us prepare for it, is when we are no longer on this earth, right? So when we pass away. And there's so many things to think about in that scenario. I will be covering my thoughts on how we should prepare for when we are no longer on this earth, when we pass away, in a separate podcast episode. But in today's episode, I would like to talk about how we can prepare for the unexpected that can happen to us physically and mentally whilst we're still alive. And in most cases, we are probably going to recover and gain capacity and be able to continue with our life as close to normal as possible. So I am going to talk about power of attorney. The power of attorney is something that people tend to think they know about. Some people don't know about them at all. It's a surprise when I bring it up. Other people have an idea, maybe from TV or having had other family members put those in place. But let's start with the basics. What is a power of attorney? And actually, before I continue on talking about the power of attorney, I will say I have received a lot of questions about power of attorneys. So I'm actually using those questions as the basis for this podcast. And I do have the questions here on my phone. So if I look down, it's because I'm keeping track of the questions and trying to make sure that I answer all those questions. But the first question is, what is a power of attorney? Basically, a power of attorney is a way of giving someone you trust the legal authority to make decisions on your behalf if you're no longer able to make them yourself or if you don't want to. Now, it's important to note that the power of attorney is only effective whilst you're still alive. So what scenarios would require power of attorney to be put in place or to be enacted? The most common one is when you lose mental capacity. And for the majority of us, we are familiar with elderly people who are suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's. In most cases, they can't make good judgments because of their mental capacity. So it's difficult for them to deal with their finances or even sometimes make decisions about their health and welfare. So in those scenarios, it is important to have someone that they trust, the authority to act on their behalf. So that's the most common scenario. But I think it's important for people who are younger to also consider some of the scenarios that come up that could result in them not being able to make decisions for themselves. And it's something that I think about a lot. Now more than ever, in this stressful world that we live in, I am experiencing a lot of my peers and people who are even younger than me suffering from things like strokes. In most cases, people have recovered, but there's been a period, whether it's 6 months, a year, or 2 years, where they really cannot make decisions for themselves, or it's actually difficult for them to just do the day-to-day things, and even simple things like accessing their bank accounts, talking to their bank, being able to move money from different accounts. I mean, if you're anyone like me, I've got 3 banks and some of them have got spaces in them, and I'm constantly moving money back and forth. So you can imagine if for some reason I was incapacitated and the mortgage had to be paid, someone needs to make sure that the money is moved from my personal account into the joint account where the mortgage payment gets paid out from. And that's just a simple scenario. I've come across scenarios where one spouse has been incapacitated and the other spouse has had no access to their bank accounts. They don't know their passwords. They don't know their emails. And so they cannot move money to make payments because that individual was moving the money physically. There weren't any direct debits being set up. But also sometimes it's just important right at the beginning of that scenario to make sure that the money that's supposed to be coming in through salaries, etc., is coming in. So I would really like you, if you are sort of, from the ages of 18 onwards, think about what could happen where you would need someone to act on your behalf. And if there are any scenarios that come into your head, then do consider setting up a power of attorney. Other scenarios, which, are not great to think about, but if you're someone who drives, I know in the UK, our roads are generally safe, but, if an accident happens and for some reason you are unable to deal with your personal affairs for a period of time, that's when your power of attorney can kick in. On the practical side of things, you have to choose someone who you trust. And it could be 2 people. Now, scenarios are there where people have 3 attorneys. They appoint 3 people to be their attorneys. And in those instances, it could be that if someone isn't available for whatever reason, the other 2 can step in or one of them can step in. There are different ways that people can act on your behalf. And I won't go into the detail because that will come up when you are setting up your power of attorney. Now, the other question is, what are the different types of power of attorney? So in the UK, where I am based, you can set up an enduring power of attorney and you can also set up a lasting power of attorney. So I'm going to be focusing more on the lasting power of attorney because those are the ones I know pretty well. And with the lasting power of attorney, there are 2 types. One which covers your financial decisions and the other one which covers your health and well-being. Now, with the one for financial decisions, it's really those scenarios I was talking about, talking to your bank, talking to your investment managers, talking to the insurance companies, etc. And so for the financial decisions power of attorney, you can actually get that one set up and have it enacted even if you have mental capacity, right? But maybe you feel that you don't have enough knowledge to look after your finances. So that one can be enacted. And I guess before I go forward, I should say that there's a difference between having the power of attorney in place and having the power of attorney active. So having it in place means it's all set up, it's signed, it's registered with the Office of Public Guardian in the UK. Having it active means that you have informed the Office of Public Guardian that you want these people to start acting on your behalf, or a particular event has happened where you now no longer have capacity. And I hope by me saying that, you realize that you have to set up your power of attorney whilst you are still of sound mind. And that means that if anyone was to investigate or ask the question whether you understood what you were doing when you set up the power of attorney, did you understand why you were choosing that particular person or those particular people to be the ones who represent you when you lose capacity? And if the answer is yes, you understood, then you will be deemed to be having mental capacity. You cannot set up a power of attorney if you're now suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's, or if you have had the stroke, but you're able to sign. At that point, the test might fail. And so then your whatever power of attorney you've put in place will not be effective and won't be accepted. So going back to the lasting power of attorneys, as I mentioned, there are two types: the financials, one that covers your financial circumstances, and the other one that looks after your health and welfare. With the financial lasting power of attorney, this covers things like your bank accounts, your investment accounts, and possibly things like insurance. It also allows your attorneys, the people you've appointed as your attorneys, to speak to your bank, speak to your investment managers, speak to anyone who has been dealing with your finances and actually make decisions on your behalf. So for example, making payments or making changes to your investments. They can also have meetings with these people to talk about your finances and agree on strategies going forward given your situation. So that's the financial power, lasting power of attorney. With the one that covers health and welfare, in most instances, that one can only be activated when you have actually lost capacity. So when you can no longer make those decisions for yourself. And this power of attorney will cover areas of your health. For example, if you're going to hospital and there's a question around whether you should get, for some people, blood transfusions are an issue. So if the doctors or health professionals need permission on giving you a blood transfusion, your attorneys will be asked that. Also, when it comes to end of life as well, any support that you've been given should be taken away because it's now deemed that you are getting to the end of life stage. Your attorneys will be asked those questions. But even if you are, say, for example, in the situation of a stroke, for example, and there are things like rehabilitation, where you should go to for rehabilitation. Sometimes you have a choice of which hospitals to go to. If you are fortunate to have private medical cover, then your attorneys will be the ones making all these decisions. So appointing an attorney is actually a very big thing, and it's a lot of responsibility for that individual. So I would say the most important thing is ensuring that whoever you appoint as your attorney has the capacity and the time to be able to support you, but also has the information to be able to, one, access your bank accounts or the contact details for the various people who are dealing with your affairs. So alongside your power of attorney document, you need to, I would say, create a list of all the people who would need to be contacted in a situation when you can no longer make decisions for yourself. Now, remember that in most instances, people recover and you can take back control of your financial affairs and your health. But the power of attorney just covers that period when you're potentially unwell, or maybe you just don't have the capacity to be looking after certain areas of your life. So it's not handing over completely for the rest of your life these responsibilities. Another question that I've been asked is it a legal requirement to have a power of attorney in place? And no, it's not a legal requirement to have a power of attorney in place, but I would say it's a sensible thing to do. Imagine if you are unwell for whatever reason and you cannot make decisions for yourself. One of the things that we'll be worrying about is what's happening with my money. There's certain decisions that I normally make for my family. I can't make those decisions because remember, sometimes when we lose capacity, we can't even talk or communicate with family members to tell them what to do. So I would say it's really important to consider a power of attorney and also to consider sharing information about how you manage things, especially if you've got a family. Duties tend to be delegated, whether it's consciously or unconsciously, to the different people. And you kind of end up just moving and not really communicating about the steps that you take to make sure that certain things are done. And it's important to share those steps, because when we do lose capacity, it's very difficult at times for, especially in the first couple of weeks, for the other individual to add those duties to their long list already, because they're also going through a traumatic experience. They don't have their partner there to support them in things like school runs, or just, making sure that bills are paid, or helping with dinner. And it actually is quite a traumatic experience. And at the same time, you'll be going through a traumatic experience, especially if you can't communicate. So for me, I would think of a power of attorney as that it gives you a bit of breathing space to be able to focus on your recovery. And I feel like that's an aspect that people miss and ignore, that sometimes you need a break. And that power of attorney will just give you that permission to actually step back and focus on your recovery, so you can recover quicker and get back to taking care of your business. You can get back to doing things for yourself and your family and making the decisions for yourself. There's no legal requirement to have a power of attorney when it comes to your personal affairs. There might be a requirement if it's regarding a business, but for your personal affairs, there's no legal requirement. However, I believe that we should all consider putting in place a power of attorney, because it's just one piece that can help us focus on speedy recovery, so we can get back to doing things that we normally do. Another question that comes up a lot is, what are the challenges of setting up a power of attorney? And I would say the biggest challenge is really choosing your attorneys. As I've said before, they need to be people that you trust. Also, I think they need to be people who understand the various aspects of responsibility. So, for example, if we're talking about people who are going to be talking to your investment managers, you want someone who has got a bit more knowledge than you, or the same level of knowledge, but they can actually make decisions. When it comes to health and welfare, they don't necessarily have to have a medical degree. And sometimes that can actually complicate things, because there might be disagreements with the medical professionals. But in most cases, the challenge is finding someone who understands your wishes and who you believe will follow those through. And then another challenge that I have seen is when you have made a decision on who you want to be your attorney, especially in a family scenario. If you don't explain to the rest of the family that you've actually chosen individual A or individual A's B and C, when the power of attorney does get enacted or is required, those people you've chosen as your attorneys can sometimes find it difficult to act on your behalf, because other family members or other stakeholders in your relationships are asking them questions, querying why they were picked and why not them. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it's important to communicate. And one of the biggest challenges is communicating your decisions to other people who may feel that they should have been the ones picked as your power of attorney, or they have got your interests at heart more than these other people. I would say those are probably the key challenges. Thinking about the unexpected is highly emotional. So talking about setting up a power of attorney or setting up a will is understandably very, very emotional for a lot of people. And I tend to think about power of attorneys and wills as well as an insurance policy. If anything, it is a good thing. They are both great ways of making sure that all the hard work you've put into running your household, running your life, building your wealth is protected, and that there are people there who can take over from you when it comes to the power of attorney. There are people in place ready to step in for you so that you can focus on recovering. money cannot buy you that space and time for recovery. A lot of recovery is in the mind. So if you are constantly worrying about things that are happening outside because you haven't set things in place, it will actually slow down your recovery. So I would say when you think about setting up lasting powers of attorney, think about it as an additional aspect of your recovery process. That's how I would reframe it, and I'd encourage you to reframe it in that way. And actually, maybe you might have a different way of thinking about power of attorney in a positive way, and I'd love to know what that might be, because it could help others. So please put that in the comments below, or send me an email at info@thewealthconversation with your thoughts on how we can think more positively about the power of attorney. It's important to seek advice when considering setting up a lasting power of attorney. There is a lot of advice online, and if you're in the UK, the gov.uk website has got fantastic guides on how to set up the power of attorney, how to choose your attorneys, who to choose as a witness, etc. They've got very good step-by-step guidance. If for some reason you are considering reviewing your will or setting up a will, I would say speak to your solicitor who's going to do that work for you about the power of attorney, and they can advise you on the best way of doing that and who to choose as your attorneys. If your family situation is complicated, or if you're someone who doesn't have close family, it can get a bit complicated, and it might be worthwhile seeking advice from a solicitor or someone who's qualified to write power of attorneys in terms of who to choose as your attorney. But I think the important thing is communication. Run your decisions by somebody, because also in terms of signing your power of attorney, all your attorneys who you're choosing will have to sign. You'll need a witness, and you'll also need someone who is called a certification provider. And that's someone who signs to say, yes, this individual had mental capacity when they made these decisions. So actually you might need someone who is very well versed in power of attorneys to be your certification provider. Another question I received, which I believe is such a good question, is what advice do you give to young adults about the best time to set up a power of attorney? And I would say to any young adult who's listening to this, the best time to set up a power of attorney is as soon as you're legally allowed to sign contracts. And that tends to be at the age of 18. Now, it may sound weird because most young people are thinking, well, I don't have much in terms of money or making decisions. You're probably still living at home with your parents, or you're now at university. But actually, when it comes to situations where you are unable to make decisions in terms of your health and well-being because you've lost mental capacity for whatever reason, then that power of attorney becomes useful. So I would suggest, if you do have parents who you can speak to, talk to them about that. It's also quite interesting when young people, and when I say young people, now I'm talking about people between 18 to 40 years of age, bring up these topics with parents, because I've come across a lot of instances where parents don't have power of attorney, lasting power of attorneys in place. So it triggers that conversation about the parents having them in place. And that can actually be a great thing where you all go through the exercise together and make the decisions about who would be useful to be the attorney, say, for your parents, and then attorney for yourself. So I would say as soon as you start considering the unexpected, or if something unexpected happens to someone you know, then it's definitely a good time to consider putting a power of attorney in place. There may be instances where disputes happen in a family because of decisions that your attorneys have made. And if that does happen, I would say that making sure that the power of attorney was set up in the right way is extremely important. The power of attorney is a legally binding document. In the UK, it's registered with the Office of Public Guardian, and they ensure that it's enacted in the right way. And any disputes will go to them to then look through and make an assessment. But more often than not, because the document has been signed, and if you were deemed to be of sound mind, then the room for dispute gets reduced. I believe that you will find that there are less disputes if a power of attorney is in place than if you don't have one. It's not uncommon that rifts occur in terms of friendships and family sometimes because a power of attorney has not been put in place and people are making decisions based on a conversation that they might have had with you 10 years ago when you were potentially in a different space and had different beliefs. Someone might have had a conversation with you a few months before you got into the situation that has resulted in a power of attorney being required, and they have possibly more up-to-date information on your wishes, but they may not be a close family member. And sometimes, the close family members feel that they know you better, when in some scenarios, actually, your friends probably know you better. So a lot of those disputes, a lot of that anger, a lot of that frustration can be dealt with by just having a simple power of attorney in place. Just taking the time to go through the process of putting the power of attorney in place, choosing people wisely to act on your behalf when you cannot, but also communicating to the people who are important in your life that these are the people that I have chosen to act on my behalf if I lose capacity, and these are the reasons. More often than not, it's not a case of you are trying to take away the standing of someone in your life, but actually you might be considering things like the time it might take, the impact of the situation that you will be in. So I hope this podcast has been informative and useful for you. There has been a lot of information, a lot of my thoughts on why power of attorney documents are important. Please remember that I am based in the UK, so a lot of what I've talked about in terms of how to set up a power of attorney and the resources are based on a UK situation and scenario. So I would urge you to look up some of the rules and requirements where you live, in the country that you live. There will be similarities definitely in terms of what the power of attorney is, why you should have the power of attorney, and how it should be put in place. The differences might lie in terms of where your power of attorney gets registered and the different types of power of attorney, what your power of attorney covers. But the basics are that the power of attorney is a document that allows an individual or individuals to act on your behalf at a time when you can't. The last thing I will say about a power of attorney is when you do pass away, the power of attorney ceases. That means that whoever you've chosen to be your attorneys can no longer act on your behalf because you are now no longer alive. So the power of attorney is a document that is useful and can be implemented whilst you are alive. Once you pass away, it's your will that now takes over, and what you have put in your will is what people will follow going forward. There is a case of having a power of attorney and a will in place so that there is a smooth transition between the two. And I will be covering wills in a separate podcast in a couple of weeks' time. I hope this episode has been useful. I hope it has triggered some thoughts. And if you don't have a power of attorney in place, or if you know someone who doesn't have a power of attorney in place, I hope that listening to this podcast will give you an opportunity to start having those discussions with family, friends, and colleagues. It's all about expecting the unexpected and giving yourself the room and space to be able to recover from whatever it is that has caused the unexpected event. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Wealth Conversation podcast. I would love to hear your feedback on your thoughts on power of attorneys, and if you've taken any action to set up one for yourself, a family member, or if you've had a conversation with somebody and they've taken action to set up their power of attorney.